Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And thank you, Associate Deputy Director Toomey, for being here today. President Donald Trump has taken a multitude of bold actions since assuming office again on January 20th. One of these includes an executive order called Defending Women from Gender Ideology, Extremism, and Restoring Biological Truth to the Federal Government. This executive order injects common sense back into the federal government by recognizing that there are only two sexes and that an individual cannot change his or her God-given sex. Not only can people not pick their own sex, but taxpayer dollars should not be going towards feeding the gender dysphoria idea. It has been a little over a month since President Trump signed this executive order. So, Associate Deputy Director Toomey, can you tell me how the Bureau of Prisons is working to comply with this executive order, and what steps have you taken?
Thank you for the question, Congressman. Yes, so the Bureau is working closely with the department to implement the executive order. We have made a number of policy changes consistent with the order to update our policies to comply with the order. I will say that there are a number of pending lawsuits involving this issue, and so we are working with the department to implement to the extent that we can, while also consistent with the temporary restraining orders and preliminary injunctions that have been issued in those cases.
Okay, thank you. Do you have a cost estimate of how much taxpayer funds were used during the Biden-Harris administration on transgender surgeries for prisoners?
There were two surgeries during that period, one in 2022 and one in 2023, and the total cost was about $400,000.
About $400,000, okay. So with this new directive for prisoners, will taxpayer funds continue to be used for transgender surgeries?
We are no longer referring inmates for those surgeries.
Okay, great, thank you. When my colleague had mentioned staffing, so your current authorized level is 20,446, if I heard correct.
Yes.
And where are you at right now? What's your current staffing, 19 or somewhere in there?
Now, let me get it for you. Our current staffing is, our on-board is 15,992.
15,992, so almost 16,000. So you have a 4,000, almost 4,500 shortfall of staffing from 15,992, almost 16,000 to 20,446.
That's correct.
Okay, all right. Is your current budget sufficient to cover that 4,500 employee increase if you had those employees on board right now?
It is not.
It is not. Okay. Do you have an idea of how many it would cover, your current budget?
Of the 4,500,
Right,
roughly 4,500, about 3,100 of those vacancies are funded.
Okay.
The question of exactly how many more people we could pay and bring on board would assume that if we increase staffing, we could decrease overtime.
Okay.
And that we would gain some savings from overtime, so we could increase staffing, but some overtime some of the overtime is driven by the need to take inmates to the outside community for medical care, and that is not something that will be driven down by having more corrections officers.
Okay. So that 3,100 that is funded, since you don't have those employees right now, what happens to that money?
It's being paid out in overtime, and it's being paid out in incentives.
Okay, so it's not being returned to the Treasury or anything like that?
No.
Okay, all right. And lastly, I want to move on and focus on how the Bureau of Prisons is working with DHS and immigrations to enforce President Trump's historic actions on immigration and closing the southern border. It's my understanding that earlier this month, the Bureau of Prisons entered into a non-binding agreement with DHS and ICE that states that those detained by ICE will be housed in several federal detention centers across the country. So can you shed light on how the Bureau of Prisons is working with DHS and ICE on this matter?
We've entered an interagency agreement with ICE, as you noted. It allows ICE to place detainees in 5 BOP facilities: Miami, Atlanta, Leavenworth, Philadelphia, and Berlin. There are currently detainees in the first 4 of those, Miami, Atlanta, Leavenworth, and Philadelphia. The IAA provides for DHS to fully reimburse BOP for its costs associated with housing those individuals.
Okay, all right. How many individuals do you have, do you know?
As of this morning, there are about 700.
Mr. Dean?
Thank you. And I yield back.